On this day 25 years ago, I started work at FJC Studio, an architectural practice in Sydney. My name is Andrew, and this video is a small glimpse into that journey, from graduating at UNSW, starting in conceptual design, moving into project work, specializing in facade design and documentation, and eventually circling back to competitions and early stage work. It's not like there's anything particularly special about my 25 years in architecture, but I've had the privilege of working with incredible people and contributing to great projects. Reflecting on it all for this video has been surprisingly fun. If you're curious about what it's like at FJC Studio across that time, sit back, relax and enjoy. You might even spot a few golden eggs along the way. So I first started my architectural career in 2001. That was just after 9/11. Started in November, and it was a week after final graduation. And fortunately, I had a job offer at FJC Studio. At that time, it was called MGT, and later became FJMT. But at the time, I was interviewed by Rick and by Jeff Mohan, and they very kindly offered me a job when I had no experience. And I'm not quite sure why they hired me, but it was probably because of some AXO facade drawings that I did. When I went and joined the company, one of the first things that I did was learn lots of different software. Probably learned about 20 types of software, including all the CAD drawing ones. I think at the time there was MicroStation and then ArchiCAD. I also learned InDesign, Photoshop. At that time, a lot of the rendering programs, including Electro Image, Cinema 4D, and all the programs in between. So I try to make myself useful by learning these software, but I had no knowledge, so it took a long time to actually go from software knowledge to actually implementing and applying that into architectural applications. Another thing that was part of my early career is I did a lot of competitions. I worked on Auckland Business School. That was a lot of hard work at that time. It was a large university building in University of Auckland, and it was quite a unique design. After that, I worked on many other competitions that taught me about different building typologies. So I learned about university buildings, commercial buildings, multi-unit resi. Basically have a very surface level understanding of all these different projects. And that probably happened for about 3 years. I remember even one competition it was for a university in Singapore, and I was sent to hand it in. I remember Rick put me up, I think it was in the IMP building, which was fun, and it was with Architect 61 in Singapore. I remember a couple of local architects chaperoned me and took me around, and got to see lots of different things in Singapore while I handed in this competition. Another aspect that I remember from that stage of my career, it was the first time I worked as part of a team in the Auckland Business School from kind of a facade design and documentation. I was very green at that time, so it was learning everything from scratch. Had no idea what I was drawing. I was quite dependent on other architects at that time, but I tried to make myself useful by drawing a lot. Now heading towards the Harbour Bridge walk. I guess the first meaty project that I got into was Chasu Concourse. Chasu Concourse was a very long process project. It went for, I think, about 12 years, about 6 years on the master plan and then 6 years on the design documentation. I started on the project as we were doing design development, and so I remember working with Jason and Z and Annie. Annie was leading the project at that time, and Cecilia. And it was the first time I really got into the detail of making things to work. I remember working also with
Murray and Kathleen and Susanna and Basil, and it was the first time that I actually worked with a mentor that helped me. I was focused initially on quite a few different areas, including the facade and lobby areas, and the roof, which is no easy feat. But yeah, working with Basil, I started to learn how to detail the facade, how to work with metal composite panel, how to work with sandstone, and seeing how the jointing worked, how the interface worked, how the materials worked into the ground, how roof flashings worked, and it was a great experience. That project, I remember doing that until early documentation, and I think it was the time of GFC and sort of turmoil worldwide, I remember at that time. And I think there was a good deal done between the council and the contractors that actually made the project feasible. And so it's great to work on a project when things are looking very dire in the world at that time. But eventually the project was novated to the builder, and our role was minimalized after that documentation period. So then it was just a case of testing, reviewing the architect's drawings from the contractor to see that they met the design intent. So I guess in to start the career, I had a pretty wide and surface level understanding of architecture, and was exposed to lots of different things. And it's hard to compare with other people that did architecture or my peers. I'm pretty sure that if you were to enter a small firm, you'd go through a lot more to do with architectural practice and project management and understanding the full picture. I did my registration near the end of Chasu Concourse, so about on the 7-year mark. I'm just walking past the security guard. All right, I'm just gonna attempt this Harbour Bridge walk. I remember having a newborn, Caitlin, at that time, and I thought, how about give myself a challenge and also study for architectural registration. I probably delayed my study of registration a bit long, and it's because I was working in a large firm, relatively speaking. It went from, I think I was the 17th person to join the firm. Eventually we'll go up to 120, but I still consider it a large firm. But in terms of my exposure to architectural practice, it was on large projects where I did, I guess, a lot of detailed work on the design and documentation, but not on things like contract admin or fee proposals or other areas. And so I didn't feel confident going for registration, so I waited 7 years. When I actually went through the whole process of doing my logbook, I felt like I had to make things up to make it fit within the competency criteria. I try not to, but it just feels like your work is only a part of it. When I went to doing the interview with the assessor, they were actually really interested in what I was doing because they came from small practice, and so it's a case of them assessing me in my ability to be an architect and also trying to find out about my work, which is interesting. In registration, you go through the study of the full process from beginning to end, and it's quite valuable if you want to start your own practice. And even if you're in a large practice, it's still worthwhile because you understand the wider context of what you're doing. And so I actually didn't start my own practice at least not 100% for many years. Because when you're studying registration, you're aware of the risks of being an architect. You have a duty of care to the client, but also to the public, and you need to get professional indemnity insurance, which once you get it, it goes on for, you have to pay for it every year. I'm just coming up to the pylons. But I definitely think that architectural registration is worthwhile, and it helped me to think through whether what we were doing was towards the project objectives, whether it was achieving the goals of the client, whether it subjected us to any risks that we could mitigate. And so, yeah, it was definitely worthwhile. After that first 7 years, I'd probably say that come up to the second stage, where I really got into a big project and I had an increased role and increased responsibility. So that project was a large project in Canberra. It was a office building with integrated fit out. And I was on that project from the very beginning and all the way up to the very end. At the very beginning, I was on a lot of the conceptual design and the layouts, and worked with principal at the time, David. The team was very large. It was over 20 people at its peak, and we were in 2 locations, and in Sydney and in Canberra, and it was under a higher security protocol. And in that time, after the concept design, I went to the design development and then the documentation, and I worked in detail with the subcontractors for the curtain wall glazing, for the precast cladding. And in this detailed work with these subcontractors, you really understand how they think and how they see things fitting together. And also you can see when they get edgy with risks, and you kind of want to work with them, because we're all trying to achieve the goal of a building that fulfills the project requirements, that doesn't leak, that doesn't crack, that doesn't subdue itself with any unnecessary risks. But that project was interesting because the precast, I worked with lots of different finishes on the precast, including acid, wash, and polished precast, and different colors, different aggregates, different matrix. And we went to the factory a few times to see how they make it and see how they install it. I got heavily involved in all the shop drawing review. Shop drawing is where you look at every single panel is put into a drawing, and you got to see how the connections fit in the context of the other trades in the architecture. And so that was very laborious but very important work, because it's the final step before it gets manufactured and then shipped and implemented, installed on site. All right, just gonna keep on going. It's hard to summarize a large project that you work on 3 to 5 years, where you're working with a lot of consultants, builders, client reps, and it's very intense discussions, and you're trying to work towards a common goal. And there was a lot of travel involved. It was quite a strain on our family because I had a newborn at that time. I remember at the start having to travel overnight interstate, and at its peak I was probably going 3 days a week interstate, which did not help at home when I had a newborn that wasn't sleeping. But it was something that we persevered, and it's something that you do as a young architect. I'm not quite sure what kind of advice I give to other young architects going through this life stage, but somehow we have the ability to persevere at that time. After that project, I felt like I had a sense of achievement because it was the first project that I was on from the beginning to the end, and I felt like the training wheels were off, and that probably led into the second stage of my career, where I was working on a lot of projects in a more increased responsibility. And I guess the first one I worked on was Perkins Center. That was a super fast-tracked project where the day that we joined the project, they were already digging a hole. And so we had 2 years to design and document and do site work for a multi-$100 million project. Very integrated fit out and detailed laboratory spaces. It was a teaching and research facility at University of Sydney. It was very large scale. I think at that time it was going to add 10% additional floor area for the campus, and we're working with multiplex. And I remember working in a very good team under Matt Todd, with Michelle and Heidi and Hallam, and we worked very well together. We worked in association with another architect, and we were very on top of the issues in being proactive, in addressing them, in finding the most effective and efficient way to work through the project requirements and how to apply them. It was so fast. We had to do lots of very fast design studies to firm up the design, but also at a package level to do a lot of work to convince the client of what we were thinking in terms of each building element, including the cafe, including the building facade, including how we were dealing with maintenance. And there were many prototypes made where everyone was involved, from the client rep, contractor, consultant, and us, where we could see the finished product in a sample level and see how it would look, but also how it would function. I remember working on the facade and going to trips to China to view the visual mock-up over there, and went with the facade engineer. We would see how the materials would look together, and see how it might work for bird roosting, which is a big issue for facade. And it was definitely, the training wheels were off, and I was out there in the open in China, making decisions on behalf of the company, and working directly, of course, with our design director, Richards, and our projects director, Jeff. That project, I guess, started that phase of my career where I continued to work on each project at a detail level for several years each. And I didn't feel like I was in training, that I was actually contributing quite a lot and helping the team and making decisions and following the design direction of Richard at FJC. And there was a lot of support, but also a lot of expectation that we will be delivering, and a lot of big projects around Sydney and beyond. I remember at that time, my second child was born, and I was working quite intense periods of design and documentation. And I remember starting to work from home because I was working late at night, trying to do drawings, mapping out layouts, doing details, and attending my second for nappy changes in the middle of the night. And I remember drinking lots of coffee. I also remember it was the time when we all got iPhones, and I thought it was quite a novelty that we could answer emails on the fly. And I felt like at that time we actually had a advantage or competitive advantage to be able to address issues and solve them on the fly very proactively. With the increased knowledge, I was able to do design, clash detection, and do it from first principles. I know that there is BIM, and you can see things, all these things modeled in 3D, but behind that, I found that you just need to know the principles of where everything is sitting vertically, and if you can know that there's a clash at that sketch level, it doesn't matter spending many hours modeling the elements, it's still going to be a clash. So it's better to resolve it early, knowing the ceiling heights that are required, knowing what surfaces have to cross, and knowing what structural members are thickening at that time, and knowing when your facade profiles or facade or lines are affected. And so it was a lot of productive work to resolve all these things, and we were doing it quite well as a team. The next project I remember working on was Bunjil Place. Bunjil Place is a project I started from the competition, and it was in Melbourne, about 50 k's southeast of the CBD, and it was a very complex cultural facility that included a library, included a concert hall, and a council chambers, and also a gallery and many other spaces. It was a bit crazy working on the competition. It was a very crazy form. It involved a timber grid shell, and it didn't seem very realistic when we were designing the project. I thought it was very wild. We were using 3D forms that including overlapping curves and stepped things that it was curved in plan, curved in elevation, and I thought, how are we going to resolve this? But they chose our scheme as the winning scheme, and one of my first jobs is working out, after the competition, working out how to rationalize this crazy form into primitive shapes, into resolvable junctions. And I remember working initially with Adrian Yap, but eventually he moved to UK, and so I was an associate for the facade and for the roof, and I worked with Ian, and it was great because he was technically a lot better than me in the 3D, and I was slightly more experienced in the detail and into the organization and into the rationalization of the timber. So one of the first things I remember learning is trying to see how we could find symmetry, seeing what kind of stepped geometry we could eliminate, seeing how we could make the layout and the design as efficient as possible, because essentially they had a normal building budget, but they had a very fancy timber grid shell structure, and so we had to move money around to get the whole thing to stack up. I remember working on the roof with Ian and learning how to, almost like Opera House, learning how to reduce it into primitive geometries, into arcs, into conical shapes, rather than super freeform, and learning how to interface all these different facade types, which I think there were about 24 facade types, and including the lobby facade. The lobby facade was a lot of fun because it was frameless. It was, as a lobby, thermally it had to perform differently from your other typical office accommodation, and it was using low iron glass with glass fins. But because the span was more than 6 meters, we had to use a splice detail to like an H, where you got 2 fins on the bottom, a splice, and then fins at the top, and that allowed it to look glassy all the way from bottom to top. And I remember getting involved in the detail with others and trying to make it as visually simple as possible. We didn't use spiders. We used very minimalist detailing that hide all the load bars inside the joints of the glass, which was really cool. When you look at it, it looks very transparent and has a very good visibility from the inside to the outside. And so for that project, it was my second run at working, or third run at looking at a big project, and we were able to work with facade types which are more technically demanding and achieved an awesome result. And I remember seeing the timber grid show come together, and I went there with my family to see it at the end, and it was a good sense of achievement to see that being put together. Oh yes, for that project, the big projects I've been working on, they coincided with the birth of our children. So the Bunjil Place was when Evelyn was born, and I remember unfortunately having to travel interstate a few times, but it was a learning experience. All right, I've made it past the bridge. I'm now walking down, heading towards work. I think I'll start talking about the next phase of my career. After working on several projects for multi-year periods, I found that I had a liking and expertise growing in facades, and I would observe and look and see how things would fit together all around me, focusing on this element of facades, which is basically the outside of a building. And with that, I would create my own libraries of CAD drawings and study them to see thicknesses involved, and the panel jointing and the labeling and the dimensioning for how facades will work. And naturally, after that, I started a period of specializing in facade. So one of the big projects I was working on was King Phillip, and that was a residential project in the city, and that was kind of a quite advanced facade system where we achieved ventilation for the apartments using a perforated screen and sliding door system. Normally on residential buildings you see awning windows for the ventilation, and we wanted to achieve a more seamless full height look, and so there's a bit of R&D involved in getting this to work. Another feature of that building was the front deck, the stepped, the staggered layout from on each floor. Also the GRC. The GRC profiles were quite intricate and gave the building a lot of depth. Another thing that was involved a lot of R&D, work with the contractor and the subcontractors, was the balcony screens. So there was a lot of discussion about whether they were bifold or sliding and how that detail would work. I'm now walking through the rocks, just a bit of a change of topic. I'm walking through the Harrington. And this famous wall, which I took a lot of wedding videos for. So this wall, I'm quite familiar with this wall because I remember doing lots of wedding shoots. Probably took about 100 weddings, and it was a big side hustle I was doing that time, and it was called story photography. And I used to sit the husband and the wife on this doorway. Sometimes the wife would sit on the husband on the step. Sometimes they would lean on the door jamb. And yep, I've worked a lot with this wall. And anyway, next to this in the rocks area is Harrington Street. That was in that period of specialization. There was 1 year where I worked on 4 facade tender documentation packages, and Harrington was one of them. This one was also using precast forms, sliding screens, and aluminium and full height window wall. And during that year, I worked on 2 other facade packages. It was, let me just walk through the stair. I worked on a project for UNSW at Cliffbrook, and also another residential development at Commonwealth Street, and also in the Sydney High School, and a few other projects. And I remember learning how to document efficiently all the layouts, identifying the facade types, and be able to get through more projects with this increased understanding and specialization and expertise in facade. Yep, I'm just walking down these steps. So back to King and Phillip. It was learning to specialize is something that a lot of architects will do. I suppose some of my peers, they would specialize in project management, or they would lead their own firms, and some would have a specialization in structural coordination, or in sustainability, or in interiors. My specialization was in facades, and I really enjoyed it. And that was a great period of my career. After that period of specialization, I come to my current stage where, because I've been on so many projects from start to end, and I specialized in the area that I enjoy, I actually don't mind what project I'm working on. I feel that I can be productive being put anywhere and help out a project or help out a team. I know how to work with small teams, I know how to work with large teams, and I don't feel the urge to be just in managerial work. I guess it's because a lot of my work is quite technical and seeing how things fit together. And I suppose I have a return circle. So now I am working on a lot of competitions, working directly with the design director. I think a lot of people are quite scared or concerned about having a career based just on architectural competitions because of it being surface level and you might be stuck. But I actually, because I had done all this other work in between, I actually found that my project experience and my facade specialization inputs quite well back into competitions. And I like the faster reps in competitions. Competitions are typically 4 to 5 weeks, and you have to resolve a whole building in that time. Not only resolve it, you have to also communicate it in drawings and in reports. And I found that I was a good in-between person that brought all the team together and be able to map out how just the story of our scheme. And I quite enjoy my current role. I think with my very early experience in competitions, I worked on lots of building typologies, and I guess that's something that is I've learned through my 25 years or so of architecture, and so I'm pretty confident whether it's a residential building or a commercial building or a educational building or a public building or a hotel building, nothing really is going to scare me out too much. I know that I can be productive in producing or contributing towards a scheme, and I feel quite familiar working with the design director in achieving the concept. And so at this stage, I probably work on maybe 5 to 7 competitions a year. It's something that very early in my career, I would lose a lot of sleep on and probably gain a lot of white hair. But nowadays, I feel like we have a system in place, and so we can do more with less, and we can ride out the intense periods and be able to jump straight from one competition to another. My path is fairly unique. Not many people work on design competitions like me, and I'm happy to do that in my stage of career. And I noticed a car is just passing. I'm standing in the middle of the road, just waiting for this car. I suppose another thing which has helped me in this current stage is I like to explore lots of different things and seeing how cross skills can apply in architecture. And so I was interested in photography and in website design and in architecture design at all scales. And so about the period of specialization, it was also the period of COVID. And so in my spare time, working from home, I helped out a few friends in designing their places, took on the risk, bought the professional indemnity insurance, and I try not to take on too much, but I also learned from working at the smaller scale how to resolve things holistically, while at the same time specializing in facades and concept work at FGC Studio. I hope this video is helpful and useful to anyone that's starting out in architecture, and you're wondering, what I should be learning at what stage of my career. And if you have any questions, feel free to put a like or comment, and then I might be able to create more videos based on architectural practice and what I'm learning. Okay, thanks. Bye.